of it, the push of transgenderism. If you want to live your life the way you want to live your life, constitutionally, you can. And constitutionally, I have no problem with you. Moralistically, I have a problem. But constitutionally, I don't. But when you try to push it onto society in so much that you say that if you don't agree and adhere to such things, you are now a bigot, that's when I have a problem. Okay? So they will try to cancel you. They will try to tear you down. They will call you a bigot. They'll call you every name in the book. And they will also try to deplatform you for spitting basic truths. It's unbelievable. I just don't understand it. In essence, you will be bullied into submission. That's how it goes. That's how it is. Take, for example, the Wee Spa incident. I don't know if y'all have ever heard about the Wee Spa incident that happened in June of 2021, right? So let me just catch you up on it, basically. A man who claimed to be a woman went into the women's area of the spa. And according to the allegations, he undresses and exposed his partially erect male anatomy to women and girls within the same area. Pause. What kind of individual are you to sit here and expose your male genitalia to in a woman's section where there are women and girls? That's okay to you? See, common sense obviously doesn't dictate when it comes to these type of situations. Common decency doesn't dictate when it comes to these type of situations. But I'll continue. Go on, throw up slide one. Yes, indeed. A woman by the name of, she goes by at Cubana Angel on Instagram, records her interaction with the front desk employee as she angrily asks the staff how and daggone why this could happen. The staff makes up their excuses, right? Apparently it's okay. They have no problem with a man exposing himself to women and little girls. And as a result of all this going down, there is a protest. A protest was organized against the establishment where people from left, right, and center took part in. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you heard that correctly. Left, right, and center all came together to say, hey, this is inappropriate. We got to stand for our women when it comes to this type of foolishness. Since the spa won't do it, we'll do it. Left, right, and center came together. Goodness gracious, like Voltron. Woo! Can't beat that. And then go and throw up slide two. And of course, right on cue, Antifa comes out in support of the transgender individual. Of course. If we on the right say we are going to protest and we're going to go out there and say we have the right to breathe, you better believe Antifa will go out there and counter-protest and hold their breath. Maybe that's not a bad idea. Maybe we can just go out there and say we have the right to breathe, and they can go out and hold their breath and pass out. Boom. Problem solved. I'm a great humanitarian, I try to tell you. But yes, indeed, this is how it goes, right? And right on cue, the anti-Wee Spa protesters, the patriots and people who want to speak out against this foolishness, they were labeled anti-extremists, transphobes, things of this nature, because they have a problem with a male showing his male genitalia to women and little girls and a woman's space. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that's not even the crazy part. Let's dive into the crazy part of all this, okay? The transgender individual, his name is 52-year-old Darren Marager, a registered sex offender with prior convictions of indecent, daggone exposure. Go on, throw up slide 3.
You may remember the incident back in June touched off protests outside the Wee Spa in Koreatown over transgender rights. Police identified the person involved as 52-year-old Darren Marager of Riverside County. Marager, who has been a registered sex offender since 2006, now faces 5 felony counts of indecent exposure. Marager, who claims to identify as a female, also faces charges from another locker room incident in 2018 and has a long criminal history.
Let me repeat that. Let me say this one more time for those in the nosebleed section of life. Darren Merager is a 52-year-old man, a registered sex offender with prior convictions of indecent exposure. Go and throw up slide 4. Yes, indeed. Go and throw up slide 4A if you don't mind. Let's go and read this bulletin. Darren Merager was arrested on 12/30/2018 for indecent exposure, for an indecent exposure incident in which he exposed himself to women and children in a women's locker room of West Hollywood Park. Merager claims to identify as female so he can access women's locker rooms and showers. Merager is a registered sex offender and a transient with family in Marina Del Rey. So this is obviously his MO. This is obviously his stilo. He goes around, he gets his jollies by going to women's spaces and exposes himself to women and young girls. This is what he does. He's already had prior convictions when it comes to this. So don't sit here and try to tell me that there's no type of nefarious motives when it comes to people trying to exploit the system. This is sick. This is sick. People like this. I remember there was a time when people would expose themselves to get their jollies when it comes to women and what do you call them? Not streakers, but they flashers, right? They flash and they cover up and they get their jollies, right? So it's kind of interesting how people like that would oftentimes get arrested. People like that would oftentimes get dealt with by the public, right? When the public hears about a person doing something like this to women and young girls, you better believe there is some type of street justice, if you will. But not in this day and age. Now that's excused. Now that's pardoned. Now that's defended by the left. Goodness gracious. I want y'all to go ahead and peep this real quick. Go and throw up slide 4B. Go and throw up slide 4B.
You may remember the incident back in June touched off protests outside the Wi Spa in Koreatown over transgender rights.
Did you notice that? Did you notice that? As you can clearly tell, the narrative continues to be in favor of trans people, as the reporter said during her report that the protests were about transgender rights, right? You see how they framed the argument? She and others framed the argument in such a way as to produce a straw man, right? To elicit an emotionally sympathetic response by speaking in defense of trans people instead of women. But no, ladies and gentlemen, no. The protests were about women's rights, not about transgenders' rights. You see what I'm saying? There's a difference. Because at the end of the day, a woman's space was invaded by a man who exposed himself to women and young girls. This is about protecting women. The protest was about protecting women in a space designed for women from a man, a convicted sex offender, a registered sex offender who wanted to invade their space, the women's space, right? That's what this is about. This has everything to do about the rights of the victim, not about the rights of the perpetrator. But yet and still is framed in such a way to make it seem like the people in the wrong are those standing up for women. Like I said, war on women, because those who stand up for women, they're the bad ones. Never mind women. That's all about men who pretend or who claim to be women. Goodness gracious. It's really sad when you really look at this and how this goes. But all this doesn't matter. All this doesn't matter because those with a modicum of common sense and decency who protested for women's rights against a sick man, a pervert, were still vilified. Remember when I said that they will come after you if you choose to stand up for women and womanhood? This joke of a public freaking Slate, freaking leftist magazine Slate website or whatever it is, said that the whole incident was nothing more than a transgender hoax. A transgender hoax. CBS Los Angeles referred to the outraged protesters of the Wi Spa as demonstrators against trans rights. Here we go. So we who stand up for women are labeled as such. We're labeled as demonstrators against trans rights. All right? Not as men who stand up for women, not as women who stand up for themselves, but demonstrators against trans rights. Do you see what I'm saying here? Do you understand what I'm trying to break down to you? Let's move on because we're running out of daggone time. Lord have mercy. I don't even think I'll be able to get to the Don't Make Me Angry segment because I'm already angry, daggone it. This is ridiculous. Let's go on. Like I said earlier, there are two ways this war is fought. It's ideologically and physically. So let's talk about the physical part, daggone. I said let's talk about it. We're going to talk about it. So how do you ask? How do how do they try to fight this war physically? Do you remember now retired transgender MMA fighter Fallon Fox? Do you remember that he kept his transgender status a secret when he fought and brutalized two different women? Do you remember when, after he came out as trans, after he finally came out as trans, do you remember him doing this to MMA fighter Tamika Brents? Go and throw up slide 5. Look at that. Look at that. Goodness gracious. And you look at Tamika Brents, she is not some small woman. And look at the slide, look at the picture to the right. Split her wig open. Fractured her orbital bone in her eye. This is what Tamika Brents had to say about this whole situation, about after the fight of her and Fallon Fox. She says, I fought a lot of women and have never felt the strength that I felt in a fight as I did that night. I can't answer whether it's because she was born a man or not, because I'm not a doctor. Look how gracious she's being. Look how gracious she's being right now. But she continues, I can only say I've never felt so overpowered ever in my life, and I am an abnormally strong female in my own right. I still disagree with Fox fighting. Any other job or career, I say, have at it, have a go at it. But when it comes to a combat sport, I think it's just isn't fair. These were the words of Tamika Brents after Fallon Fox gave her a concussion and fractured, once again, let me say this one more time, fractured her orbital bone during an MMA fight. And then you remember when Fallon Fox, a man, right? A man who claims to be a woman. Remember when Fallon Fox bragged about him beating up Tamika Brents? Remember when a man bragged about beating up a woman? Go and throw up slide 6. This says Fallon Fox. For the record, I knocked 2 out. One woman's skull was fractured, the other not. And just so you know, I enjoyed it. See, I love smacking up TEFs, T-E-F-S, TEFs in the cage who talk transphobic nonsense. It's bliss. Don't be mad, winky face emoji, kissy lips. And for you, just for you know, TEF, it stands for trans exclusionary feminist. Okay. She's bragging about beating beating a woman. A man's bragging about beating a woman. In what world will we allow this to happen? Yes, indeed. Let's go and throw up slide 7.
Here's something that I'm not a real expert in physiology or endocrinology, but I'm a martial arts expert, and I've been doing it my whole life. Like, I know the difference. I've trained with women world champions and watched them get mauled by men who are not very good. It's just a fact. Yeah. Especially when it comes to striking. You know? And to say that those advantages are immediately cut out of the picture as soon as you transition to being a woman, and within 2 years you should be able to fight women in a cage and not tell them that you're a woman. I was like, this is insanity.
Yeah.
Joe Rogan is right. He is absolutely right. He is correct about it all. Let me just highlight what he just said right there. Let me just highlight this part. He says, I've trained with women world champions and watched them get mauled by men who are not very good. It's just a fact, especially when it comes to striking. And there is also a fact, Joe Rogan. Thank you. Needless to say, he was vilified for this. He was vilified when he was saying all these different things. He was vilified and disparaged for it. But again, he's too big to be canceled. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry. There's no comparison between the punch and kick of a woman and that of a man. Men are just naturally stronger than women. I mean, come on now. This is not even competitive MMA fighting anymore. This is competitive domestic abuse. That's what this is. It's competitive domestic abuse. Sanctioned competitive domestic abuse. That's what this is. Speaking of men who are just naturally stronger than a woman, check out this next slide. Go and throw up slide 8.
Finally, here in the first week of September, second week of September, it happens.
And you can see they're trying to bring down to the double leg, took her down to the ground. She worked her way in, got Celine tired until eventually she was able to take her down and work for the submission. I'm sure that was in the books. That was a strategy right from the get-go.
It sure was. For whatever it's worth, McLaughlin knew she could take the punches, and that is those punches. I mean, that was deep laid in there.
And Celine busted open inside her mouth as well. That was a game plan, and it worked to her advantage. Kudos to Celine. She took the fight, and kudos to Alana. Right now, I'm sure a lot of teenagers, adults are emotional.
Yes, victory for the trans community, and the conversations will go from here as to what's next for Alana McLaughlin. Whether this should be part of the sport.
Oh, yes, ladies and gentlemen. That is former member of the U.S. Army Special Forces, Alana McLaughlin, beaten to a bloody pulp, Celine Provost. Going through slide 9. Look at this. This man beat a woman and is now celebrated. This man is now celebrated. This man is now paid money. This man is now congratulated. And we're all bigots if we don't cheer him on. Look at this. Goodness gracious, the trans community just loves the fact that a man just pulverized a woman. They love the fact that a ex-Army Special Forces MMA fighter beat on a woman to feel more like a woman. Can we not see how twisted this is, ladies and gentlemen? Can we not see how twisted this is? This is sick. You see why I say there's a war on women? Megan Murphy, an editor of feministcurrent.com, says this about Alana McLaughlin. Now, bear with me, because this is lengthy, but it was on point. But let's talk specifics. Specifically, let's talk about Alana McLaughlin, a man who began training in MMA 6 months ago and was permitted to fight a woman who has been training for a decade and beat her. I am not opposed to compassion for individuals, but McLaughlin is not simply some poor innocent man desperate for a chance to compete. I don't believe he is so deluded to think that he is literally female. For him, it's political. He knows exactly what he is doing, and he has a hate on for women. I don't know if he meant a hard on for women or that he has a hate for women, but either way, it's on point. This is a guy who is well-versed in trans activism and is using it as an excuse to behave in a misogynistic way or to behave in misogynistic ways and perpetrate violence against women. The notion that this is some poor soul who just wants to be included is evidenced to be a joke just by looking over his Twitter feed, right? And she continues, I don't for 1 second believe McLaughlin is innocently seeking quote-unquote inclusion or quote-unquote fairness. He knows all the manipulative mantras to spout, including comparing women who challenges his entitlement and violence to Nazis. Typical. So typical of the left to do that. And including wearing an End Transgenocide shirt to celebrate his win against competitor Celine Provost. And as though there were such thing as though there is such a thing as genocide, quote unquote, against people who have body dysmorphia or who would like to appear as the opposite sex. In fact, it seems those who identify as transgender can get away with violence against others and is celebrated. This is on point. This is hatred against women. Lord have mercy, this woman is on point. This is violence against hatred. This is hatred against women. This is violence against women. This is a war on women. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to stand up. Men, we need to stand up. And I'm going to draw this to a close. Men, we need to stand up. There's one thing we were bred to do other than serving the Lord, and it is to protect our women and daggone children. Okay? It's that simple. We cannot allow our women to be treated like anything other than the beautiful queens that they daggone are. We as men are supposed to be the king of women's hearts and defend them like knights defending the throne. That's what we're supposed to do. No more standing on the sidelines. No more letting these leftists push around our women and beat on our women and denigrate our women. No more. We have to have some type of recourse when it comes to this sort of thing. We have to stand up for our women, men. It's that simple. And women, you got to stand up for yourselves too, daggone it. You need to stop. And when it comes to these fighting in MMA sports, you got to stop taking these fights. Let them know that you're not standing for a man beating on a woman. Don't try to prove anything. We understand the physics of the situation. Stop it. Don't let these men try to shame you into believing you're not a decent human being for not adhering to basic science, to basic anatomy and physiology, basic common sense, basic decency, basic everything. When it comes to reality, we understand what's going on, okay? You're a miraculously designed person, women. You're a miraculously designed people who can create whole human beings and expel them out of your daggone bodies. Don't let them make a mockery of that. Don't let them make a mockery of your superpower, and don't let the left make a mockery of you, daggone it. Goodness gracious, it's time to start fighting back for our women. It's time to take this culture back, and daggone it, that's exactly what we're going to do. And we're out of time, baby. Oh, goodness gracious, we're out of time. But thank you for tuning in, my fellow Smashers. I really appreciate it. You can find more of me at Turning Point USA on YouTube. You can find more of me at Real Talk Period Productions on YouTube. You can find me at Real MAGA Hulk on Instagram and Twitter. And remember, there is indeed a war on women. So us men of valor and women of integrity, we got to band together to fight against these type of people who wish to distort truth. Okay? That's what we're going to do, Lord have mercy. Anyways, we will see you next week for more liberal ideological destruction. Until next time.
Hey everyone, it's Jon Root. Don't go anywhere. Coming up next on TPUSA Live, watch a special episode of POPlitics where host Alex Clark shares details of the Ruby Ridge siege, the site of an 11-day siege from federal agents in Idaho in 1992 that led to an incredible controversy and inspired one of the deadliest domestic terrorists our country has ever seen. Next on POPlitics.
The name Ruby Ridge is enough to send chills down the spines of those who know its story. For those who are unfamiliar, it's a name that incites curiosity. What is Ruby Ridge? Who lived it, and what happened to them? These are all questions I will answer today. This story is a tragic tale of how one family found themselves on the top of a mountain where their lives would take a dramatic turn. It's a story of just how far government overreach has gone in modern American history. Today, more than ever before, it needs to be told. I'm Alex Clark, and this is Ruby Ridge Siege, Mayhem and Massacre on the Mountaintop. In the early 1990s, the Weavers were just your average American family. Randy and Vicki Weaver were God-fearing people with a desire to raise their children in a remote part of Idaho, away from the government they believed would be instrumental in ushering in the end of the world. Randy and Vicki Weaver married in Iowa in 1971. He had enlisted in the Green Berets before their wedding, and Vicki had always been fiercely independent. They were a bit of a match made in heaven because they shared the same religious views, skepticism of the government, and the idea that the world was going to end and they needed to be prepared. They also wanted to live in a place removed from society. 5 years after their wedding, they had their first child, Sarah, and eventually welcomed Samuel and Rachel. During the years the Weavers were starting their family, Vicki began claiming that she was having visions of a mountaintop where their family would live in order to protect themselves from the apocalypse. They actively prepared. Randy collected a lot of firearms and Vicki studied survivalist skills. In the meantime, they also started a Bible study, which only fueled their anxiety over a Zionist organized government. Yikes. In 1983, they acted on their worry and bought 20 acres in Idaho, which we now know as Ruby Ridge. 1 year later, after constructing their home themselves, they officially became mountain residents. Vicki took up gardening and they homeschooled their kids. Then they took in Kevin Harris, a rough around the edges teenager. They were isolated, not just in their beliefs, but physically. All they had was one another. So Randy went looking for a community they could join. One of the most controversial elements to this story is Randy's involvement with the Aryan nations. And, well, obviously, this is rightfully controversial of him, given the immorality of the group's beliefs and its blatant racism. One could argue that had he stayed away from this group, the incident at Ruby Ridge may have never occurred. You are the company you keep, after all. Some say that Randy primarily joined the group in efforts to socialize his family. They were new to the area and especially isolated due to their location of their house. Their interactions were few in the grand scheme of things. Randy even insists that he did nothing illegal with the group itself. He did, however, act criminally when he got desperate for money. The Weavers were not wealthy. They lived a humble life in the mountains and at times subsided off their garden and whatever else they could forage for themselves. Still, they were struggling. And so when Randy finally decided to come up with a solution, he unfortunately turned to the worst person in the Aryan nation to make an illegal sale of an illegal object to, an ATF informant. Randy sold the informant 2 sawed-off shotguns, which is a federal offense. I don't condone the company he kept, and I don't condone him breaking the law whatsoever, but I also can't imagine how he felt when he learned that he had landed himself in hot water with the very people he'd moved to the mountains to avoid. Randy wasn't one to flippantly commit crimes. This one instance seemed to be an isolated event. His decisions were totally wrong. But you move to the literal middle of nowhere, and your biggest nemesis, big government, is still there, in secret, and of all the terrible people they could pick from, you happen to make the perfect wrong decision. Life choices truly have terrifying consequences, ones that are realized quickly and others that have ripple effects down the line. So he committed a federal crime and needed to be punished, right? Like I said, Randy was surrounded by some bad people. He wasn't really a concern for officials. In fact, he became way more useful to them as they attempted to infiltrate the Aryan nations more and more. The ATF gave him 2 options: become an informant himself and the charges would be dropped, or face the consequences of his illegal sale. Randy basically told the government to get lost by denying the offer and refusing to work alongside them against the Aryan nations. The Weaver's daughter Sarah recalled in an interview that as her parents made their way home in the snow with their kids, they stopped to help what looked like a couple who had broken down. The couple, however, were actually government officials there to arrest Randy. Both he and Vicki were wrestled down in the cold and Randy was taken to jail. He ended up posting their mountaintop home as bond. Randy was now in a far graver predicament than when he sold the sawed-off shotguns. His refusal to cooperate certainly wasn't going to help his case, and he could not afford to lose everything. He was assigned a court date for the gun charges, but never made it in. Reports say that he missed the court date because he was given the wrong date. All of this sounds both fishy and convenient, but maybe the truth is just that his skepticism of the system made him a no-show. Who knows? Whatever the case, Randy's predicament was now in the hands of the U.S. Marshals. The Weaver family isolation went on for 17 months until their lives changed forever. Some choices have ripple effects that only show themselves months later. In this case, it was going to cost the Weaver family everything. On August 21st, 1992, U.S. Marshals were staked out and prepared to ambush the Weaver property to finally arrest Randy. Remember, the property was isolated in the mountains, not far from the Canadian border. I imagine it was quiet enough to hear sticks cracking beneath feet as people scaled the landscape. It was summer. The Weavers were more isolated than ever before. They'd spent a long winter alone on the mountain with their children. Vicky had even birthed their daughter, Elisheba, in isolation. The tension of knowing that Randy had a target on his back was mounting, and in one day, that very target became lethal. I wonder if the Weavers knew they were being watched. Had they felt, in all of their suspicion of the government, that they were watched way before they moved to the mountains? Did they feel like they were being watched before Randy was found out by an undercover agent? Just think about all of that pent-up anxiety, the feeling that at any moment you could be ambushed in some way. You just don't know when or how. If they expected the government to show up on their doorstep, I doubt they ever thought that it would all start the way it did. So on a summer morning, U.S. Marshals forced their way onto the Weavers' property, fully armed. They were clearly ready for a confrontation. I can't be sure what their plan was, if they were going to storm the house or if they were really going to try and capture Randy as subtly as possible. It's been reported that they were merely there to scope out the situation further. Also, I have to know, what did they think of children being on the premises? They'd already been watching them with cameras. Who did they think they'd encounter first if they wandered too far onto the property? The Weaver's dog was the first to sense trouble on the property, alerting both the household and the U.S. Marshals. Randy and Sam Weaver and Kevin Harris went to see what the commotion was. Sarah, the eldest daughter, decided to go home. Within minutes, there was gunfire, multiple shots. Billy Deegan, one of the marshals, had been hit. The Weaver family claims that Randy, Sam, and Harris came upon officials donned in their uniforms and that the dog was shot and killed first. As a retaliation, Sam allegedly shot at the marshals, who then allegedly shot back and killed him. The marshals, however, claim that Kevin shot first and killed Billy Deegan. What actually happened may always stay on top of that mountain, stuck in time that fateful morning. Sam's death changed the Weavers' lives more than anything else had. Now, they weren't just a family with a fugitive father, but they, as a whole, were a grieving family that had just lost a child. Their isolation was only furthered if such a thing was possible. On the other end of the situation, the case changed hands yet again. Now, the FBI was involved, and Randy Weaver was basically the most wanted person in the country. The FBI was ready to confront the Weavers with everything it had. In fact, agents were permitted to use deadly force against the Weavers. Next day, a grieving Randy and Kevin went outside to check on Sam's body, which had been stored in a shed. Within moments, a gunshot rang out the property and got Randy. Traumatized Vicky began screaming for her wounded husband and Kevin to come back to the house. She stood at the door of her home, baby in her arms, ushering in Sarah, Randy, and Kevin, when another shot blasted through the entrance of the home. With the blast came a splatter all over Sarah's face. Then she realized what had happened as her mom, Vicky, dropped to the floor directly behind her, with her baby sister still in hand. At the time, Sarah was just a teenager. Randy picked the baby up, and the surviving members of the household tried to compose themselves as snipers laid in wait outside. Eventually, officials found Sam's body in the shed, and word traveled down the mountain that a child had been murdered. Something that's very suspicious about this situation is how little the government let on about what was actually going on. To some extent, I understand that the public doesn't need to know everything about an active case, yet from this vantage point, it looks like there was a massive miscommunication, not just with the public, but within the government agencies. Even more grim, authorities didn't seem to realize that Vicky had been murdered too. Officials would call out to Vicky through speakerphones, only adding to the grief and stress of those still inside the Weaver home. It seemed cruel and insensitive. Finally, Randy had had enough and began yelling back, a dramatic shift from his usual silence. Officials felt that appealing to Vicky would help them get to Randy. Meanwhile, her body lay dead in the kitchen. Okay, pause. How? How could the FBI not know that they had killed Vicky? She was killed by world-class snipers who know their target from insane distances and do not miss. They are trained to fire accurately. It is beyond me that she could get shot so accurately and no one knew about it. And then they ask her to bring the kids out with pancakes while her remaining children, her daughters, sit inside terrified of losing anyone else. I'm just so sick over this. There were hundreds of feds outside and only 5 civilians inside, 3 of which were children. Anyway, the FBI made attempts to negotiate, much to no success. The media coverage raged on with one-sided narratives. There was little to no compassion for this family. Again, Randy had committed a crime, but this was also an average American family that had now been through unreasonable trauma. There was no world where he would ever trust the government before the siege began, and there was no way they'd get an inkling of his trust ever now. The FBI had to look beyond its team and get on Randy's level. Cue Bo Gritz. He'd been a presidential candidate and Green Beret like Randy. Bo was more than eager to help. 8 days after the ordeal began on Ruby Ridge, Bo was taken up the mountain to negotiate with Randy, who recognized him immediately. One of the first things Randy told Bo was that the FBI had not just badly wounded Randy and Kevin, but that Vicky had been killed. If ever there was a time for the FBI to start some self-reflection, that was it. And now the public knew just how dire this hopeless situation was. The next day, Bo negotiated with Randy to allow Kevin to leave the house so that he could receive care. It's likely Kevin would have died soon had Randy not let him leave. Then Bo brought a body bag for Vicky. The end of the ordeal was near, and the grieving Weavers knew it. Bo went inside and found Randy with the girls in tears. On the very last day, Randy informed Bo that his daughters refused to come out and would only exit if killed by authorities. Bo was not having that. The door then opened, and Randy surrendered with the girls. The siege was over. The Weaver family held hands with Bo, and they began their descent down the mountain they'd been on for so many months. Randy Weaver and Kevin Harris both went to trial for murder charges. However, in the middle of their trial, government overreach, once again over firearms, was underway in Waco, Texas. Even more people, including children, died. The jury was specifically instructed to not pay attention to Waco. But on July 8th, 1993, the long deliberation came to an end when Randy and Kevin were acquitted of the murder charges. All Randy was convicted of was failure to make his court appearance from 2 years prior. Eventually, Randy was compensated $3 million for the deaths of Vicky and Sam, and the sniper who killed Vicky was charged with manslaughter, only for the charges to be dropped. Randy and his daughters are still alive today. Sarah is perhaps the most recognizable of the family. She wrote a book with her dad, and she's spoken out the most about that fatal siege and the lives of her mom and brother. Her faith in God, she says, has brought healing to her life. I wanted to tell this story today because it's one that people my age don't seem to be familiar with. I think it's a huge lesson in nuance. You can view Randy's actions as criminal, and we should all condemn his involvement with the Aryan nations, but you can do both of those while still seeing how far the government overreached. Randy's actions had consequences, but he didn't fire the guns that killed his son and wife. There were around 400 officials against this man on a mountain who just wanted to be left alone. And in the end, the very legal system that went after him with an iron fist acquitted him of a murder charge and left him with a lifetime of grief. America is a great country, but no system is perfect, and too much government never ends well for innocent American citizens. The more we tell stories like these, the more likely we are to learn from past mistakes, see situations from all sides, even if it makes us uncomfortable, and know how and when to spot government overreach. Tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, I have a treat for you, another Pop Doc. This one all about the Waco siege, because it's Halloween week, and nothing is scarier than big government, or should I say spoopy. If you're really into the storytelling episodes, you will love my new podcast on Spotify and Apple called The Spillover, where I interview people with jaw-dropping stories just like this one. Who knows? Maybe I'll reach out to Sarah Weaver and see if she can come on. The best way to support POPlitics is to like this episode. Let me know in the comments if you knew about this case and what you think. Share this Pop Doc to your stories and hit that save button. It's pop culture without the propaganda every single day. I'm Alex Clark, and this is POPlitics. Support POPlitics, the first ever conservative pop culture daily show, by subscribing to our channel, turning on notifications, and of course, hitting the thumbs up. Also, our main home is on Instagram. Seriously, just trust me, that's where the real magic happens. Follow us there at POPlitics.